So, a number of years back, I acquired a house through my family. I won't bore you with the details, but it was through some pretty weird and convoluted circumstances itself. The house itself is very strange looking inside. Like, I'd best describe it as something from Alice in Wonderland meets Black Lodge from Twin Peaks. Lots of weird angles, weirdly sized rooms with no clear purpose, and decorating that looked like it came from somewhere who'd only read about how humans live in a book. More spiritually oriented folks who visited would variously claim it had a vaguely sinister, dark feel to it, while others would say it had a light and inviting energy. Not sure how much stock I put in any of that, but it's worth noting. The real weird stuff started early on. Within the first couple of months, me and my housemate kept finding weird bits of writing all over the place. First, it was seemingly just names, all kinds of random personal names. Although the handwriting was neat, we figured it might have come from the kids of the family who lived there before us. But it's maybe worth noting most of it probably wasn't them writing their own names, at least, as the family that had lived there spoke Spanish and were Latino, and most of these were decidedly not Latino names. Like, I can't remember them all, but there was stuff like Gertrude and Siobhan, if I recall correctly. Also, we found probably over 15 of these names at least, and only 7 people lived in the house before us. I guess the kids might have just been scrawling random names they knew for some reason, but we then started finding other stuff, like whole sentences tucked away onto countertops or on baseboards, and eventually even on our furniture, like stuff that didn't come with the house. The sentences were never really threatening or anything, they were just strange and mostly nonsensical. Sometimes they looked like lyrics to songs, but they never came up as anything when I tried Googling them. Also, to be clear, the fact we kept finding these random scrawlings made zero sense, as sometimes we would swear they had showed up in places we'd already looked before, almost like more of them were being made, and yet they all looked very similar in handwriting. A little wavy and childlike, but overall neat, neutral, legible. This was starting to feel more and more like the beginning of some stereotypical horror movie, but it still wasn't weird to really freak us out yet. We also had lots of stuff go missing, usually only to turn up later, often in a really weird place we were both sure neither of us had left it. But again, nothing too out of there yet. Also, there was some minor, maybe poltergeist like activity early on, like objects seeming to jump off fixtures on their own, but again, nothing too major. There were pretty consistent electrical issues as well, including a microwave we had to keep unplugged because it had this habit of turning itself on, but probably just faulty wiring in an old house, right? No, you see, things really began to ramp up. I remember about a year after we moved in. I had gone on a road trip for a week and didn't get back until nearly 4 a.m. in the morning. And when I got back, I was greeted by a strange little nest of dried glass, with 3 roughly equal sized but differently coloured rounded stones sitting in front of my front door. This was weird, but I assumed it was something one of my roommates, I had 3 by this point, had put out for one reason or another, and I didn't think too much of it. My friend I was travelling with noticed too when she was helping with bags, and again found it odd, but didn't think too much of it. So the next day I casually asked my housemate what was up with the little bed of grass and rocks. But they were all confused, as each of them had assumed I was the one who put it there. At this point, I assumed either my roommates or a friend of mine was playing a prank on me. A really strange prank, but a prank nonetheless. With this assumption, I did the whole, okay, nice one, you got me, assuming at least one of them would confess to their not so clever prank. But all of them insisted they had no part in it, and continued to for the rest of the time I knew them. And I'm inclined to believe them, as none were really the prank type, and would definitely have admitted it under duress. After all, it was about as harmless a prank as you can get. All of my friends I confronted said the same exact thing and never let up. And really, the only friend I could easily imagine coming up with such a weird and abstract prank was actually the one I was on a trip with. So obviously there was no way she had done it, and I'm completely certain it wasn't there when I left. And all my roommates said it wasn't even there the day before I got back. So really, that just left the possibility of it being the work of some random prankster in the neighbourhood. but there were problems with that too, such as the fact that these stones got moved and put back exactly the same on multiple occasions, until the whole thing creeped me out enough that I finally took them inside, which stopped them being put back again and again. But maybe was a mistake if you believe what they maybe tried to. Something. Who knows, I guess. And on top of that, I asked our incredibly nosy next door neighbour about it once, like if she'd been seeing anyone suss out our porch. And she said no, but she'd keep an eye out. And to be clear, she was retired and kept an eye on all things all hours she was awake. And was a light sleeper, so this prankster would have had to be continually coming back in the middle of the night to set these rocks up with cat burglar like stealth over and over again, immediately after they were disturbed. But it gets even weirder. The poltergeist type activity ramped up and eventually led to stuff like the bathtub turning itself on in the middle of the night when I was the only one home. And I have no history of sleepwalking or anything like that. And then both me and at least one of the roommates started getting woken up in the night by mice. Except both of us swear to God that when we occasionally caught glimpses of the critters in question, they were weird. Like really weird, in that they were incredibly pale, maybe hairless, maybe bipedal, and apparently tailless. But granted, we only ever caught Greek glimpses of them because they were incredibly fast. Like, faster than usual mice. And seemed to make some effort to stay out of the light or the open. We also both suffered strange, vivid nightmares and heard voices. And while for me this isn't completely unusual and can probably be chalked up to mental illness, my roommate had no history of anything more severe than depression, had never taken any substances beyond weed and alcohol, and was hardly that into those. She was sober during these experiences, to be clear. And yet she apparently suffered so much from these experiences at this house, she eventually moved out. I don't know what, but apparently she had some final really bad experience that pushed her over the edge, but she never told me what. There was some other stuff, like the house getting a lock mysteriously put in on it by a property firm who didn't own it. Like I said, my family did, without anyone at the property company having any knowledge of who among them did it. And whoever did it apparently did so in the dead of night because, again, my neighbours hadn't seen anyone do it while they were awake. Maybe just professional incompetence, but who knows? Also, other stuff showed up on our porch over time, like bundles of twigs and, no joke, a sprouting sweet potato and rotting fruit. And again, I'm reasonably sure it was not the work of anyone I knew. Anyhow, I no longer live at that house. A family friend rents it currently, and I've moved back in with my family due to hard times. Thanks, COVID. But I've been thinking about all the odd experiences I had there lately. And while they're maybe not the weirdest or least explainable things I've ever had happen to me, they always stick me as both oddly personal somehow, as well as oddly senseless. Now, the only reason I mention the Fey Folk Fairies as a possible culprit in the title isn't because it's the conclusion I personally came to. If I were to go paranormal, it actually struck me more like some kind of haunting personally. But because I spoke to a friend of mine who is a lot more into esoterica paranormal stuff than I am, and she immediately assumed it might be old trickster fairies. No joke. Keep in mind, this friend did have a bit of a personal connection to the whole Fae thing, and that she actually claims to have been abducted by the fair folk when she was little. The whole thing is not my story to tell, but I will say that although this girl held some metaphysical beliefs I'm not quite on board with, she never struck me as an out-and-out liar, and she certainly experienced something strange and traumatic when she was young, and never even wanted to talk about it with most people. The curious side of me always wanted to pick her brain on what being taken by fairies was supposed to be like, but like I said, it seemed like she didn't want to talk much. Still, she was right about the fact that certain aspects of the whole thing do seem to evoke the weirdness and fickleness of a mythological figure. And we maybe did see little people, even to boot, but who knows? The girl had suggested leaving out food as an offering to appease them, but we never actually tried this because the rational side of us still wanted to believe that we just had mice. And leaving out snakes for Max is notoriously the opposite of a good idea. This story is from when I was in middle school. I had a best friend that I used to go to sleep over his house, or he would stay at mine. This weekend I slept at his house. It was a normal day, just hung out and played video games. Then nighttime came. This was when it happened. Now for the details. It was me, my friend, and his brother. We went to bed, just to have me startled in my sleep. I've no idea what time it is, but it's pitch black in the room we were sleeping in. I was on the top bunk, his brother was beneath me, and my friend was on a bed right next to his brother. So I went to see if maybe my friend was up. He wasn't. But what I saw haunts me to this day. I looked down at him, and there was a small brown figure on his chest. He had long fingers with long fingernails, short legs, small body, big head, circular yellow eyes with dark insides and sharp teeth. Now I was on the top bunk, and it turned its head up at me and looked at me. Remember, it's pitch black in here, so how did I see this? The only thing I thought of doing was getting a light on and see what the thing was. I jumped down from the bed, ran into the hall, turned the light on, and went back into the room just to see it was gone. I told my friend's family about it the next day, but they all just laughed at me and said I was crazy. But now and then I think about that night, but I can't explain. I was 19 years old and I lived with my grandmother. She was going on vacation and did not want me to be home alone, so I was to sleep over at my mother's house for a week, I think it was. This didn't bother me. I had a car friend and a girlfriend. It's what she said that I blew off that should have scared me. She said not to go to our house while I'm away, because my mother is watching over it. Her mother died years before I was born. Creepy, but I let it slide. The weekend had come and I was hanging out with my girlfriend, but we were getting bored, so I said, hey, let's go to my grandmother's and get my NES. I like to collect old video games and systems. Anyways, we drove up to her house and I told my girlfriend to stay in the car and I will be right back. I opened the door and there was her dog, but acted like my dog usually would follow me around. Down to my room in the basement, my television was right at the bottom of the stairs, so I only needed to turn on the main hallway light. But I thought to myself, it's a little dark in here. And this is what happened. The light on the other side of the room turned on. I'm the only one in the house, and had been now for a couple of days because my gran was on vacation. Curious, I started walking over to the light, and it was one of those lights you had to turn a key, and you hear the click click noise and it turns on. So I get a step towards it and click click, it turns off. I'm now scared, but finished taking my NES and look up the stairs to see her dog staring down at me. And I called for her, but she wouldn't come. I left that house so scared, only to have to return to it and sleep down there again when my grandmother got back. I took off shaken and told my girlfriend and my mother what had happened. My parents moved from Ireland to Middle England in the early 90s, into a house which was built in the early 1900s. It's a pretty Georgian semi-detached, and next door, which used to be part of a garden, an older couple lived who became very close to my family and were basically our grandparents. The woman, let's call her M, grew up in our house. They built their house on what was once the garden and ours to look after their aging mother and mother-in-law. M's mother was a wealthy woman. They had a live-in maid and would have been quite upper class back in the day. But unfortunately, her children were all ailing in some way. Her eldest boy died at 4, and M had diabetes. In fact, she was one of the first people to receive insulin, which saved her life in her late teens. And the youngest boy was very disabled, physically challenged and non-verbal. My granddad, Jay, thought he may have had some sort of locked-in syndrome, which quite a lot of intellectual gifts beneath an ability to communicate. And mental illness, too. Edit, I lost my granddad last year. M died many years ago. He was my best friend and a soulmate. A war veteran at 101 died alone due to COVID, which was so unfair. I'd love anyone reading this to spare a thought for his memory, as he was the most frickin' awesome dude. I have so many stories from him in his century-long life if anyone wants me to start a separate thread about that. In 2011, after working far too hard in my early 20s and my first job after university, college for my transatlantic cousins, I felt totally burnt out. 6 years of intense high-level schooling and then a 60-hour week? Nah. I moved back for a bit, just to take a breather whilst finding another job. 3 weeks into me being there, the disabled brother, Grandad's Jay's brother-in-law, died. He would have been in his 90s. 2011. It began within days of Jay's brother-in-law's death. First of all, just a kind of eerie feeling, as if I was being watched. I wondered if I had developed some kind of anxiety problem, as I had suffered panic attacks for a brief spell in my teens. Then scratching. We had never had a bird or mouse problem before. My dad was so often working away, to be honest, but he was there sometimes. If we should have pest control come over and check the walls of the house. They said it had only been quite recently, so we should wait a while. Maybe it was some roosting pigeons nestling the last weeks of their fledglings. Then a kind of tapping, rapping sound, almost like someone was gently knocking from within the bricks of a house. I became so used to strange sounds around me that I lost all interest in trying to find out the source. Usually taps, knocks and bangs were all accounted for. I presumed maybe old pipes had become unsecured or next door had rats. But I also ignored the fact that we had lived in the house for 20 years and had none of these problems before. One morning, I woke up with a start. It was dusk, about 5 a.m. The old TV that had sat abandoned for 6 years in the corner of my brother's old room where I was sleeping was clicking madly. The walls were scratching, the knocking, even though the heating was off and it was summer, so no pipes could have been causing it. It was in a frenzy. I stared around for a few seconds, completely in terror and shock, and realized almost immediately that this was a paranormal energy. When I say the energy was frenzied, I mean it. It was like a quietish cacophony. I filmed it on my phone and have it on a laptop somewhere. When people say you can't film that something, this is why ghosts don't exist. You can. I know nothing about the paranormal. I used to piss myself laughing at horror films. So why would it come into my head so strongly and completely that this is what that was? I found that odd. This went on for a few days and I mentioned it to my mum. She laughed it off. My mum was an accountant and a super intelligent and impractical person. She is where unnecessary drama goes to die. I googled it and found an article. What was creepy about it, and scares me to this day, was that I was textbook what was happening to me. The scratches, the tappings, how it seemed to be getting louder and how the sounds began to feel intentional. Like 3 obvious knocks rather than just tapping. So human. Also, that I had never felt fear like it. I could have had a wonderful evening laughing with friends, they go home. I went up to bed feeling so warm and wonderful. And then I awoke, unlike ever before in my life, somewhere between 3 a.m. and 5 a.m. with the most unbelievable sense of dread that frankly did not feel like it came from me. I mean, I did not feel like the source. Then the nightmares came. I felt like the more I thought about it, the more it fed off this energy. Like there was a legit psychological level to all this. That was the worst part about it. The nightmares were always the same. I woke up, only I couldn't move, so it was sleep paralysis, and there was a dark presence in the room. Sometimes in the form of a shadow in the corner. A large male shadow, and the most ominous feeling I ever felt. Terror and danger like anything I could ever have imagined. I had never, and have never, had nightmares before or since. Maybe the odd small one, but I don't really get them. I haven't had any experiences like it since, actually. Typing about it even spooks me out because I feel like the energy you let out is whatever this thing fed on. Despite this, I chalked it up to anxiety, so I told my mum I was no longer sleeping in that room, and she said she would swap, so I went to the sofa. The next few days were fine and peaceful until Mum came down one morning completely ashen-faced. I asked if she was okay. She described getting sleep paralysis even though she didn't know what it was, for the first time in her life. I might add and describe my appearances. The male shadow figure, I hadn't told about this, in the same order. With the same feeling, Jay's brother-in-law was over 6 foot, by the way, and he was an angry, tortured soul. And the room was M's old room. She also had the classic incubus thing. I didn't have that. When I told her to Google it, it was a real thing. She was horrified how similar her experiences were to others, because she had never heard of either. Things got worse from there. Whatever this was grew angrier and angrier. Every night, just as you were about to drift to sleep, literally that second of losing consciousness, there would be a huge bang on the bed's headboard, like the whole strength of an incredibly strong man, wrenching you from sleep. It was happening in every room now. We started to get insomnia. Not sleeping for the best part of 3 months is shit, let me tell you. I was getting really fed up and was a nervous wreck and decided to move out. But before I did, I called a carbon monoxide person to check for leaks. There weren't any. A week before I moved out, things started happening in the day, and even my father, who hadn't angrily shut it down since he's more stubborn than that, a notion of mules and hates anything remotely dramatic or whimsical. He's a working class Irishman scientist through and through, and deeply resents the magical thinking Catholic hoo-ha he was brought up with. Agreed to finally get spiritual help, maybe even a priest. That night we decided on that. I woke up with one of the huge bangs, only to find the books on my floor. I finally had evidence to show my parents, and they couldn't deny that. I didn't show them. I couldn't have. I didn't leave my bed. I screamed and they came in. They would have heard if I left my bed. Those last few days included audible growls. I even recorded a few. Incredibly strong smells of male sweat mixed with some kind of ammonia. And my sister, she was visiting. And I running, screaming, and almost over to the neighbours because I was explaining how the rocks were irrational. Like sometimes 1, 2, 3. And as soon as I finished saying 3, there were 3 very loud, intentional knocks on the door right next to us. Also, my name was whispered so many times. Whatever this was wanted to us knew it was hearing us. My mum said she was also pushed across the landing against the wall in the middle of the day. I left mum, went to church for the first time in 20 years. She only went a few miles, but she said it helped. I came back to do a visit 3 months later. One morning, when I heard my mum come down for breakfast, I turned to it and we both said, "It's gone," at the same time. My boyfriend and I were on vacation in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, staying at an Airbnb on the St. Mary's River in Sault Ste. Marie. It was an older 3-bedroom house with its own nice private beach. We had the entire place to ourselves for the night. We started off the night by leaving to get some food, play Monopoly, going swimming. Nothing out of the ordinary occurred. As soon as it got dark, we went out to smoke some weed before we ate the food we'd just bought. We went back in, had our dinner, and went to the master bedroom. We were both on our phones when the light on the ceiling fan started to flick on and off. I said that the house was old and suggested we just turn the light off. He said no, and that we should keep it on. This is when he first told me that he had a bad feeling, and I said he was just paranoid from the weed. I walked out the hallway to the living room to see if I could sense the energy he was feeling, and he followed me. I felt as if nothing was wrong and went back to the bedroom. He stayed in the hallway, staring at a closed bedroom door. I asked why he was staring at it, and he said, "I swear I just saw the light in this room turn on and off." I was more concerned about a person being in this house, and I said we needed to go in there and look. We walked in, checked under the bed and in the closet, and nobody was in there. He became really startled, and I was confused because I was still really high and had zoned out. He said that the dresser had just been shaken really aggressively against the wall. I was skeptical since I hadn't seen it myself, but I said I believed him, and we left the room. After we were back in the living room, he said, "I have a really bad feeling, like something bad is going to happen if we stay here. We need to get out of here." We had nowhere to go until the next day, and I didn't want to leave, but I agreed that we'd go for a drive, come back after, and get our things and leave if we still felt the same way. After we finished driving, we went back into the house, and he still had this bad feeling. I still didn't want to go, but I agreed that we'd get our things and leave. We walked into the master bedroom first, and the light switch for the ceiling fan and light was off. We'd left it on. My boyfriend said, "This is exactly what I'm talking about. Look at the fucking fan." It was moving slowly in a circle, and as soon as I looked up, it began moving faster, but inconsistently, as if someone was batting at it. The light began to flick on and off again as well. Mind you, the switch is still off on the wall. This was enough for me to start freaking out, so we grabbed everything out of there and the master bathroom and got the hell out of that room. Next, we went to the kitchen to do our dishes, since it was a requirement for checkout. My boyfriend reached into a drawer, pulled out the biggest knife in it, and turned his head to look at me. He said nothing and put the knife down and closed the drawer. I assumed he was trying to show me that it was there in case there really was another person in the house. He started visibly freaking out, and I asked what was wrong. He said, "I'll tell you in the car." We packed up, locked the house behind us, and hit the road. I asked him what he'd been so afraid about, and he said, "That thing was talking to me the entire time. It got control of me when I was reaching for that knife, and it told me to stab you. I had to stop myself and fight it." He continued on, saying that he'd been listening to these things the whole time, such as "fucking hit her" and "pick up that chair and throw it at her." Hearing this made me sick to my stomach. We ended up sleeping in my car at a rest stop, and neither of us slept well at all, with this lingering awful feeling. Nothing has really happened to us since, so I don't think it is attached to us or anything, but I just can't fathom how it gained that much control over him in such little time. This activity started when my father tried to readjust to civilian life after leaving the military. He eventually turned to drink, and this is when the activity started. He also became physically abusive to my mother. Halfway through the events I list below, my mother had a restraining order put on my father, kicked him out the house, but the activity continued. This occurred between the age of 4 to 8 years old, over 4 years. My childhood story goes as follows. It started when I was 4 years old. The first incident was when my aunt and cousins visited my house. We were all in the living room, then I needed to use the bathroom upstairs. So I went into the hallway and saw a dog. It looked like a Doberman. I thought my aunt had a new dog and I went into the living room to ask. I was excited to see it. My mother and aunt looked at each other in surprise, searched the house, and in the end I was smacked on the butt for lying. The dog vanished. The next morning, my cousin said she saw the dog when she went to the bathroom in the night. It was downstairs looking up at her. When my mum was home alone, she was cleaning the kitchen and saw the dog in the hallway. She opened the front door and told it to get out and leave. It went out the door and we never saw the dog again. Then sometime later, I was eating cereal before school. I could tell my mum the cereal tastes funny. I didn't know about sour milk then. The issue was our milk was delivered fresh every morning by the milkman, and the neighbour's milk was fine. Also, fresh fruit would start to rot and turn brown within a few hours of being in our kitchen. A further development was the handle of the kitchen door to outside would shake at night. My father went down to check and hold the door handle. It stopped then when he returned upstairs and started again. Then the next step was I started to become scared and feeling fear in my bedroom. I was too scared to sleep in there alone, so I would go to my parents' room to sleep. One night we had a New Year party and I was put to bed with my cousin Alex. He was a tough kid, local bully. We were both in my bed in the dark. I heard him start to cry and he asked if I was awake and I said yes. He said there's a shadow man in the corner of my bedroom watching us and he screamed and shouted his father. Our fathers came up and took us downstairs where the adults were celebrating, then they all left soon after. I never saw a shadow man. I only felt scared and fear in the bedroom. Father was kicked out the house after this point. One day my half-brother visited and was playing with our neighbour on the park. My mother took me to the shops with her and told him she'll be back in 30 minutes with candy. My brother saw my living room blinds move from the park and thought me and my mum returned with the candy. He went into the house with the neighbour and found the TV on, radio on, and gas fire on full power in the middle of summer. Me and my mum returned to find them waiting on the park, too scared to come into the house. I learned the next part later in life when my mother opened up to me about it as she hid this from me until I was 20 years old. The final incident that happened forced us to move was my mum was hoovering my bedroom. Inside the bedroom there was a large storage compartment with a door that leads into the walls. The door was fully closed when she entered the room. She turned her back to the door when hoovering and she said she felt pure evil behind her, something very negative. She turned around and saw the door fully open, so she dropped the hoover and ran to the garden screaming. My neighbour, who was a retired police officer, jumped over his garden to see what happened. She said there's something in the house, but he misunderstood it for someone in the house. He got his old police baton and isolated the electricity from outside to turn off the hoover that was still on. By this time, my mum was in the house, with his wife having a cup of tea and emotional breakdown from it. He said there was nobody inside, and she said no, there was something in the house, not a person. Then they explained when me and my mum were away on a vacation in England with my future stepfather, the lights in my room would turn on and off at night, along with noises of footsteps. The neighbour checked it out with his flashlight battered and his dog Toby, thinking it was my father coming back whilst we were away. The dog would growl at the door and not enter our house. The neighbour inspected the house, but he found nobody. Then when he returned to his house, the footsteps and lights would start again. So they decided not to tell us because they didn't want to scare my mum and me. They kept it secret. Soon after, we moved to England. The next experience I had that connected me back to this was when I started my career at sea. I was on a container ship sailing around Asia, and I had multiple deep dreams of being in this old house with several other people of different nationalities, trapped in the large old house. It had red wallpaper, lanterns on the walls, and oil paintings of people with very high ceilings. It looked very Tudor, 1500s, 1600s. I could always interact with these people until it came. We would all be paralysed and thrown around the large room we were in, and I'd wake up paralysed, unable to move, cold sweat in my bed on the ship until I'd break out and free myself. The fear I felt was the same as in my childhood bedroom back in Scotland. The final dream I had an interaction with it. I dreamed I was in a pitch black room with a circle of light around me that I was safe in. To the left of me were lightly lit wooden stairs leading up to a door with light piercing through the sides of it. The entity called my name in a croaky voice and laughed, sounding like an old smoker's voice. It told me to come into the dark and join it. I fought back and told it to fuck off. I'll never be like you. And I called it pathetic piece of shit. It quickly responded with a come with me now. I told it no, then ran for the stairs. I got to the door and I felt my right leg being pulled. I kicked multiple times back into the dark on my pulled leg, and I felt it contact against something. I got through the door and I was in this house I had seen before in my dreams. I saw the red wallpaper, the lanterns and oil paintings. I then woke up, but this time free, not paralysed. Deep down, I feel the voice I was talking to was what was in my room back in my childhood home, even though I was on the other side of the planet. Since then, I've had a couple of dreams in strange old houses, feeling a presence, but never back at that old Tudor house.